I watched a man die in front of me, and no one moved. The rain hit the pavement like broken glass, sharp and endless, turning the alley behind the diner into a river of reflections and shadows. My shift had ended 20 minutes ago, but my feet still ached like I'd been standing for days. The smell of burnt coffee clinging to my clothes as I pushed the back door open with my shoulder. That's when I saw him. He was leaning against the brick wall like he'd just missed a step, one hand pressed to his chest, his head tilted slightly forward, as if he were listening to something no one else could hear. For a second, I thought he was just another drunk trying to find his balance. Then he slid down. Slow. Controlled. Like even falling, he refused to lose dignity. I froze. So did everyone else. Two line cooks stood just inside the door behind me, whispering under their breath. A delivery guy paused halfway to his truck, keys dangling from his fingers. Nobody stepped forward. Nobody said a word. It was like the air itself had decided this wasn't something we were supposed to touch. Call 911. Someone muttered, but no one actually reached for their phone. I don't know what made me move. Maybe it was the way his hand tightened once against his shirt before going still. Maybe it was the silence. Or maybe I just couldn't stand there and watch someone disappear while everyone else pretended not to see. I stepped into the rain. Cold soaked through my shoes instantly, but I barely felt it. Hey, I said, kneeling beside him, my voice steadier than I expected. Can you hear me? No response. Up close, he didn't look like someone who belonged in an alley. His coat was tailored, dark and expensive even under the streetlight, and his watch caught a flicker of light that told me it probably cost more than my rent for a year. His breathing was shallow. Too shallow. Come on, I whispered, more to myself than to him. My hands moved before my thoughts could catch up, fingers pressing lightly, checking, adjusting, remembering bits of training I never thought I'd actually use outside of a textbook. Stay with me, I said, leaning closer. For a moment, nothing changed. The rain kept falling. The alley stayed quiet. Then, barely noticeable, his chest rose deeper than before. Once. Then again. I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. That's it, I murmured. You're okay. I wasn't sure if that was true, but I needed it to be. Behind me, I heard a car door slam. Then another. The sound echoed too cleanly through the rain, too deliberate to be random. Headlights flooded the alley, turning everything white for a split second. I looked up. Black SUVs. Doors opening in perfect sequence. Men stepping out in dark suits that didn't belong anywhere near a place like this. They moved fast, but not rushed. Controlled. Like they already knew exactly what they were walking into. One of them stopped a few feet away from me, his gaze dropping to the man beside me, then lifting to meet mine. Sharp. Assessing. Don't move, he said, not loud, but it carried. I didn't answer. I couldn't. Because the man I had just pulled back from the edge moved. His hand, warm now, closed around my wrist. Not tight, not threatening, just enough to stop me from pulling away. I looked down at him. His eyes were open, dark, focused, and somehow, despite everything, completely aware. He didn't look confused. He didn't look weak. He looked like a man who had simply decided not to leave yet. His fingers tightened slightly. Stay, he said, his voice low, rough, but certain. And in that moment, surrounded by strangers who looked like they could erase this entire alley from existence, I realized something that made my pulse spike in a way the cold never could. I hadn't just saved a man. I had just touched something dangerous, and it wasn't going to let me go. His hand should not have been that steady. Not after what I had just seen. Not after the way he had stopped breathing in my arms like the world had already decided to move on without him. But his grip was firm. Intentional. Like he was not asking. Like he was reminding me that I had crossed a line I could not uncross. The man standing above us stepped closer, his shoes splashing lightly against the wet pavement, his eyes never leaving mine. Let go of him, he said, calm but absolute. I swallowed, my throat suddenly. Dry despite the rain. He needs help, I said, the words coming out softer than I wanted. The man's expression did not change. He is help. Before I could respond, two more men moved in, precise and silent, crouching beside us with practiced coordination. One of them checked the man's pulse. The other spoke quietly into a device I could not see. Everything about them felt controlled, rehearsed, like this was not chaos to them. This was routine. I looked down again. His eyes were still on me. Dark. Focused. unwavering. You stayed, he said, his voice barely above the sound of the rain, but it cut through everything else. I did not know how to answer that. Because the truth was, I did not know why I stayed. I just knew I could not walk away. His fingers tightened slightly around my wrist, not enough to hurt, just enough to anchor me there. Then, slowly, like it cost him something, he let go. The absence of his touch felt louder than the noise around us. One of the men immediately stepped between us, a subtle shift that placed distance where there had not been any seconds before. We will take it from here, he said, not unkindly, but with finality. I sat back on my heels, my hands resting on my thighs, suddenly aware of how cold I was, how soaked my uniform had become. The alley did not feel like mine anymore. It felt like theirs. Everything did. They lifted him carefully, not like he was fragile, but like he was important. Like nothing about him could be treated carelessly. As they moved him toward the vehicles, the headlights shifted again, casting long shadows across the brick walls. I thought that was it. That they would disappear the same way they arrived. Fast. Clean. Like a scene that never happened. Then one of them paused beside me. Different from the others. Older. His gaze studied me for a moment. Not threatening, but deliberate. What is your name? He asked. I hesitated. Every instinct told me to lie. To protect whatever part of my life had not already been pulled into this. But something in his expression told me it would not matter. They already knew more than they needed to. Emily, I said finally. Emily Carter. He nodded once, like he had. Just confirmed something. You did well tonight, Emily Carter. The way he said my name made it sound like it belonged in a file somewhere. Filed. Stored. Remembered. I watched as they placed him into the back seat of the SUV, one man sliding in beside him, another closing the door with quiet precision. The engine started almost immediately. No wasted movement. No unnecessary noise. Just efficiency. Before the door shut completely, I caught one last glimpse of him. His head resting back, eyes half-lidded now, but still aware. Still there. And just before the door sealed him away from the world again, his gaze found mine. Not by accident. Not by chance. On purpose. The vehicles pulled away seconds later, tires cutting through the rain, taillights fading into the distance until the alley was empty again. Just me. The puddles. The sound of water hitting concrete. Like nothing had ever happened. But something had. I could feel it in the way my pulse refused to slow, in the way the night felt heavier than it had before. I stood there for a long moment, staring at the space where they had been, trying to convince myself that I could go back inside, clock out, go home, and forget all of this. But deep down, something quiet and certain settled in my chest. People like that did not just disappear. And they definitely did not forget the girl who touched them when they were at their weakest. I did not sleep that night. I told myself it was the caffeine, the late shift, the rain that never seemed to stop tapping against my apartment window like it had something to say. But that was not it. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw his face again. Not the way he looked when he collapsed, but the way he looked at me before they took him away. Like he had already decided something. Like I was part of it. By morning, the city felt different. The same streets, the same noise, the same people rushing past with coffee cups and deadlines. But something underneath it had shifted. Or maybe it was just me. I went back to work because that is what you do when you do not know what else to do. Routine is safe. Predictable. It gives you something to hold on to when your thoughts will not. Settle. You look like you got hit by a truck, Jenna said as soon as I walked behind the counter, tying my apron with fingers that felt slower than usual. Feel like it, I muttered, reaching for the coffee pot. She laughed, but it faded quickly when she really looked at me. You okay? I nodded too fast. Just tired. That was easier than explaining something I did not understand myself. The morning passed in a blur of orders and small talk, the steady rhythm of pouring coffee and carrying plates grounding me in something normal. For a while, I almost convinced myself it had all been a strange, late-night hallucination. Until the door opened. The bell above it chimed softly, the same as it always did, but the room changed anyway. It was subtle. The way conversations dipped just slightly. The way people glanced up without meaning to. I did not look at first. I did not want to. Because some part of me already knew. Emily, Jenna whispered, her voice lower than usual. Do you know those guys? I followed her gaze. 3 men stood just inside the entrance, dressed too sharp for a place like this, their presence pulling attention without asking for it. Not loud. Not aggressive. just certain, like they belonged wherever they decided to stand. My stomach tightened. No, I said, but the word felt thin. One of them stepped forward. Not the oldest from last night, but close. His eyes scanned the room once before landing on me with quiet precision. Found. Not discovered. Found. Miss Carter, he said, like he had been saying my name for years. My hands stilled around the coffee pot. Yes. My voice sounded calm. It surprised me. He gave a small nod, almost respectful. We would like a moment of your time. Every instinct told me to say no, to step back, to pretend I had no idea what this was about. But the way he stood there made it clear that this was not a request I could ignore. I am working, I said carefully. He glanced at the counter, at the customers, then back at me. Your manager has already been informed. I turned toward the office without thinking, and sure enough, Mr. Collins stood near the doorway, giving me a look I had never seen before. Not annoyed, not impatient, careful. It is fine, Emily, he said quickly. Take your break. My break. Right. Like this was normal. I set the coffee pot down slowly, wiping my hands on my apron even though they were not wet. Okay, I said, more to myself than to them. The man stepped aside, giving me space to walk past him, but the movement felt controlled, intentional. As I reached the door, I hesitated for half a second, the weight of the room pressing against my back. Then I stepped outside. The air was colder than I expected, clearer than last night. A black car waited at the curb. Not loud, not flashy, just there, waiting. The man opened the back door without a word. I looked at it, then at him. Where are we going? I asked. He held my gaze, steady and unreadable. To see the man whose life you saved. My pulse skipped. Just once. Enough to remind me that whatever had started in that alley was not over. Not even close. I should have said no. That was the thought that kept repeating in my head as I stood there, staring at the open car door like it was a line I could still choose not to cross. But my feet moved anyway. Maybe because I already knew refusing would not change anything. Maybe because part of me needed to see him again just to prove to myself that last night had actually happened. I slid into the back seat, the leather cool and too clean against my damp clothes, and the door closed with a soft, final sound that felt louder than it should have. The city moved outside the window as we pulled away, but inside the car, everything was quiet. Not the comfortable kind. The kind that makes you aware of every breath, every shift of your hands in your lap. I kept my eyes forward at first, watching the streets I knew turn into streets I did not, the buildings growing taller, cleaner, more distant from anything that looked like my world. After a few minutes, I could not take the silence anymore. Is he okay? I asked, my voice steady but lower than usual. The man in the front passenger seat glanced at me through the mirror. He is alive, he said. Not reassuring. Not warm. Just a fact. I nodded slowly, even though he was not looking at me anymore. Alive. That was something. But it did not answer the question that sat heavier in my chest. The car turned again, smoother this time, and then slowed as we approached a building that did not look like anything I had ever been inside. Glass. Steel. Quiet. The kind of place where everything feels expensive even if you do not know the numbers. We pulled into a private entrance, the kind with no signs and no reason for anyone to notice it unless they already knew it was there. The car stopped. The driver stepped out first, opening my door before I could reach for the handle. This way, the man said, gesturing toward the entrance. I stepped out, my shoes clicking softly against polished concrete, and followed them inside. The temperature changed immediately. Warmer. Controlled. The lobby was empty except for a desk that looked more decorative than functional and a man standing beside it who did not ask questions when we passed. He just nodded, like he had been expecting me. The elevator ride was silent. Of course it was. Everything about this felt designed to remove noise, remove chaos, leave only what mattered. When the doors opened, the hallway beyond was just as quiet. Soft lighting, thick carpet that swallowed every step, doors spaced far enough apart that you could forget anyone else existed. We stopped at the last one. The man beside me paused, his hand resting on the handle for a second longer than necessary. Then he looked at me. Whatever you are thinking, he said, his voice calm but deliberate. Remember that he asked for you. My breath caught, just slightly. He opened the door. The room inside was larger than my entire apartment. Clean lines, minimal furniture, everything placed exactly where it should be. And in the center of it, Near the wide windows that overlooked the city, he stood. Not lying down. Not weak. Standing. Like the night before had not happened at all. Adrian Volkov turned as we entered, his movement slow but controlled, his gaze finding me instantly like it had never been anywhere else. For a second, neither of us spoke. The men behind me stepped back, giving space without being told. It was just him and me now. His eyes moved over me once, taking in the uniform, the damp hair, the uncertainty I was trying not to show. Then he took a step closer. "Emily Carter," he said, my name quieter this time, but heavier somehow. Not a question, not a guess, a certainty. I swallowed, forcing myself to hold his gaze. "You look better," I said, because it was the only thing that made sense in a moment that did not. The corner of his mouth shifted, not quite a smile, but close enough to make my pulse stumble. "That is because of you." The words settled between us, simple but impossible to ignore. He stopped a few feet away, close enough that I could see the details I had missed before. The precision, the control, the kind of presence that did not need to raise its voice to be heard. "Do you know who I am?" he asked. I hesitated. Because I did. Or at least, I was starting to. "I think so," I said carefully. His gaze sharpened, just slightly. "Then you understand why last night changes things." I did not answer, because I was not sure I wanted to understand. He studied me for a moment longer, like he was deciding something I could not see. Then he spoke again, quieter now, but more certain than anything he had said before. "You touched me when I was dying," he said. A pause, just long enough for the words to settle. "People who do that do not go back to normal life." My chest tightened, my thoughts racing ahead of me, trying to find a way out of something that was already closing in. "I did not mean to get involved," I said, the truth slipping out before I could stop it. His gaze did not soften. It did not need to. "That does not matter," he replied. And somehow, the calm in his voice made it worse. Because it meant this was not chaos. This was a decision. Already made. And I was standing right in the middle of it. The room felt smaller the longer I stood there. Not because it actually was, but because of the way he looked at me, like space did not matter, like distance was something he could close whenever he decided to. I shifted my weight slightly, trying to remind myself that I was still in control of my own body, even if everything else felt uncertain. "I have a job," I said, the words coming out more defensive than I intended. "I have a life." His expression did not change. If anything, it sharpened, like I had just confirmed something he already knew. "Had," he corrected quietly. The single word landed heavier than it should have. I frowned, a flicker of frustration pushing through the tension. "You do not get to decide that." For a moment, there was silence. Not empty. Measured. He studied me the way someone studies a problem they already planned to solve. Then he took another step closer. Not rushed. Not aggressive. Just inevitable. "You think this is about control," he said, his voice calm, almost thoughtful. "It is not." I crossed my arms without realizing it, holding my ground even as my pulse picked up. "Then what is it about?" His gaze did not leave mine. "Consequence." The words settled between us, quiet but absolute. I let out a breath, shaking my head slightly. "I helped someone. That is all." "No," he said, just as steady. "You interfered in a moment most people would have avoided." His eyes flicked briefly to my hands, then back to my face. "You made a choice." I opened my mouth to argue, but nothing came out. Because he was not wrong. I had made a choice. And now I was standing here because of it. "I did not ask for this," I said finally, softer now, the edge fading into something more honest. Something uncertain. His expression shifted then. Not softer. Not exactly. But something in it changed, like he understood that part of it, even if it did not alter anything. "No one ever does," he replied. The city stretched behind him through the glass, endless and distant, like a reminder of how small I was compared to whatever world he belonged to. I took a slow breath, trying to steady myself. "So what happens now?" That was the question that mattered. The only one that did. He held my gaze for a long moment before answering, like he was deciding how much to say, or how much I was ready to hear. "Now," he said, his voice lower, more deliberate. "You are under my protection." The word protection should have sounded reassuring, safe. But coming from him, it felt like something else. Something heavier. "I do not need protection," I said quickly, instinctively. "You needed it the moment you stepped into that alley." he replied without hesitation. My jaw tightened. From what? He did not answer right away. Instead, he turned slightly, walking toward the window, his hands resting loosely at his sides as he looked out over the city. For a second, I thought he might ignore the question completely. Then he spoke. From the kind of attention you now have. My stomach dropped just slightly. Enough to notice. I did not do anything, I said again, but this time it sounded less certain. He glanced back at me over his shoulder. You were seen. 2 simple words. But they carried weight I could not fully understand yet. And in my world, he continued, turning back to face me. Being seen at the wrong moment matters. I felt the room shift again, the air heavier, the reality of what he was saying settling in piece by piece. This was not about gratitude. Not really. This was about something bigger. Something I had stepped into without realizing it. So what? I said slowly, choosing each word carefully. I am just supposed to stay here? His gaze held mine, steady and certain. No, a small pause. Just long enough to make my breath catch. You were supposed to stay close. My heart skipped, the meaning behind that landing deeper than I expected. That is not the same thing, I said quietly. No, he agreed. It is not. Another step closer. Close enough now that I could feel the difference in the air between us. Not threatening. Not overwhelming. Just present. You go back to your life, he continued, his voice even, controlled. You work. You sleep. You pretend nothing has changed. His eyes locked onto mine again, sharper this time. But it has. I swallowed, my mind racing ahead, trying to find an edge to hold on to. And if I do not agree to this? I asked. The question came out before I could stop it. His expression did not harden. It did not need to. You already agreed, he said quietly. The moment you chose not to walk away. And that was the moment I realized something I had not wanted to admit. This was never a negotiation. It was a shift. A line crossed in the rain, in a moment that lasted seconds, and now everything on the other side of it belonged to him. The ride back felt shorter. Or maybe I just stopped noticing the distance. The city outside the window blurred into something distant and unreal, like I was watching someone else's life move past instead of my own. No one spoke. Of course they did not. Silence seemed to follow him everywhere, even when he was not in the car. When we pulled up to the diner, everything looked exactly the same as when I had left. The same faded sign. The same cracked sidewalk. The same bell above the door waiting to chime. For a second, I just sat there, staring at it, trying to convince myself that I could step out and everything would go back to normal. Miss Carter, the man beside me said, not unkindly, just enough to pull me back. I nodded once and reached for the handle, but before I opened the door, I hesitated. What happens if something does go wrong? I asked quietly. He did not pretend not to understand. It will not, he said. Simple. Certain. Like the world bent around that statement. I almost laughed, but the sound stayed in my chest. Because now I knew better. Things like this always came with a cost. I stepped out of the car, the air hitting my face sharper than before, like I had been gone longer than just a couple of hours. The door closed behind me, and by the time I turned, the car was already pulling away, disappearing into traffic like it had never been there at all. I stood there for a moment, staring at the empty street, feeling something settle under my skin that had not been there yesterday. Then I pushed the door open and walked back inside. The bell chimed. Heads turned. And just like that, everything was different. Emily, Jenna said, rushing toward me, her voice a mix of relief and curiosity. Where did you go? Those guys just took you and... She stopped mid-sentence, really looking at me this time. Are you okay? I nodded automatically. I am fine. It sounded convincing. Even to me. Mr. Collins appeared from behind the counter, his usual impatience replaced with something closer to careful respect. Take the rest of the day off, he said quickly. You do not need to finish your shift. I blinked. What? No, I can work. I am already here. He shook his head immediately. It is handled. Handled. The word echoed in my mind, too familiar now. Who handled it? I asked before I could stop myself. He hesitated just long enough to answer the question without saying anything. I did not push. I did not need to. I already knew. I grabbed my bag from the locker, my movements slower now, more aware, like I was waiting for something else to change. But nothing did. Not immediately. That was the strange part. Everything looked normal. Felt normal. But underneath it, something had shifted into place. When I stepped back outside, The street felt quieter than it should have for the middle of the day. I started walking, the familiar route to my apartment unfolding in front of me, but about halfway down the block, I noticed it. A car parked across the street. Engine off. Windows dark. It had not been there this morning. I kept walking, telling myself I was imagining things, but when I reached the corner, I saw another one. Different make. Same stillness. My steps slowed. My pulse picked up, not from fear exactly, but from recognition. This was what he meant. You were seen. I turned the corner, my building coming into view, and there it was again. A man leaning casually against a lamppost, his posture relaxed but his eyes alert, scanning without appearing to. When his gaze flicked toward me, just for a second, I knew. Not a threat. Not random. Intentional. I reached my door, my hand tightening around my keys as I unlocked it, stepping inside quickly and closing it behind me. The quiet of my apartment wrapped around me, familiar and small, but it did not feel the same anymore. I walked to the window without thinking, pulling the curtain aside just enough to look out. The man was still there. The car was still there. Nothing obvious. Nothing loud. Just presence. Controlled. Constant. I let the curtain fall back into place, my reflection staring at me faintly in the glass. You are under my protection. His words echoed in my head, calm and certain. I leaned back against the wall, exhaling slowly, trying to steady the rush of thoughts that would not settle. Protection. It should have made me feel safe. Instead, it felt like something else entirely. Because for the first time, I understood what he really meant. I was not just being protected. I was being watched. And the line between those two things was thinner than I ever realized. I tried to ignore it. That was the first instinct. If I did not look too closely, if I did not let my mind connect the patterns, then maybe it would all fade into the background like city noise. But it did not. It followed me. Quietly. Constantly. The next morning, I left my apartment earlier than usual, telling myself it was just to clear my head. The street was already alive with movement, people heading to work, cars passing in steady rhythm, everything exactly as it should be. And yet, within a few steps, I felt it again. That awareness. That subtle shift in the air. I glanced across the street. A different car this time. Same stillness. Same presence. I kept walking. At the coffee shop on the corner, the barista smiled at me like always, asked if I wanted my usual, and for a moment, I almost believed things were normal. Until I noticed the man by the window, sitting alone, not drinking his coffee, just watching the reflection in the glass. Watching everything. Watching me. I took my cup, forced to thank you, and left without finishing it. By the time I reached the diner, my nerves were stretched thin in a way I could not explain out loud. You look better, Jenna said as I tied my apron, her tone light, but her eyes searching. Do I? I asked and she shrugged. You do not look like you are about to pass out anymore. That was something, I guess. I stepped behind the counter, trying to fall back into the rhythm, the comfort of routine, but it did not settle the way it used to. Every sound felt sharper. Every movement more noticeable, like I was waiting for something to break the surface. Around noon, the door opened again. The bell chimed. Conversations dipped. I did not need to look this time. I already knew. The same man from yesterday stepped inside, his presence quiet but unmistakable. Not rushed. Not hesitant. Like this place was just another stop on a list he had already planned out. My hands stilled around the plate I was holding. Jenna followed my gaze, her expression tightening. That is him again, she whispered. I nodded once, setting the plate down carefully before stepping out from behind the counter. I did not wait for him to call my name this time. I walked toward him, met him halfway. You are making this very hard to ignore, I said quietly, keeping my voice steady despite the way my pulse picked up. He inclined his head slightly, acknowledging the statement without denying it. That was not the intention, he replied. I almost laughed at that. Really? He held my gaze, calm as ever. The intention is clarity. I folded my arms, grounding myself in the motion. Then be clear. A small pause. Measured. Deliberate. You are being watched because you are connected to him, he said simply. No hesitation. No softening. Just truth. I felt my chest tighten, even though I had already known it. Hearing it out loud made it real in a way I could not ignore anymore. And if I do not want to be connected? I asked, my voice lower now, more controlled. His expression did not change. That is no longer a choice that exists. The words landed heavier than anything else he had said so far. I shook my head slightly, frustration pushing through the calm I had been holding on to. You keep saying that like it is supposed to make sense. He studied me for a moment, then reached into his jacket, pulling out a small card and placing it on the counter beside us. You will understand soon enough, he said. I glanced down at it, my name printed neatly across the front. Not handwritten, not guessed, placed, confirmed. I looked back up, but he was already stepping away, moving toward the door with the same controlled ease he had arrived with. The bell chimed again as he left. The room slowly returned to its usual noise, conversations picking back up like nothing had happened. But for me, everything had changed again. I picked up the card, my fingers tightening around it slightly as I read the line beneath my name. A single sentence. Simple. Final. You are under his protection now. I stood there for a long moment, staring at those words, feeling the weight of them settle deeper than before. Because now it was not just something said in a quiet room high above the city. It was something written, something placed directly in my hands. And something told me this was only the beginning of understanding what that really meant. I did not go home right away. I told Jenna I needed air, and she did not argue this time. She just watched me with that same quiet concern that had started to follow me everywhere. Like even she could feel something had shifted even if she did not understand what. The card felt heavier in my hand than it should have as I stepped outside, the late afternoon light stretching long shadows across the street. I turned it over once, twice, like maybe something new would appear if I looked at it from a different angle. It did not. The words stayed the same. Clear, certain, unavoidable. I slipped it into my pocket, but the weight of it stayed with me anyway. I started walking without a destination, letting the city pull me forward, hoping movement would quiet the thoughts that kept circling in my head. It did not. Every reflection in a window made me glance twice. Every car that slowed near the curb made my chest tighten, just slightly. Not fear. Not exactly. Awareness. Like my world had expanded overnight, and I did not know how to fit inside it anymore. By the time I reached my building, the sky had started to dim, the soft glow of streetlights replacing the fading sun. I slowed near the entrance, my eyes scanning without meaning to. The same man from earlier stood across the street, not hiding, not pretending to be anything other than what he was. Present. Watching. I held his gaze for half a second longer than before. Not challenging. Not accepting. Just acknowledging. Then I turned and stepped inside. The hallway felt smaller than usual, the familiar walls closing in slightly as I made my way to my apartment. I unlocked the door and stepped in, closing it behind me with a soft click that echoed louder than it should have. For a moment, I just stood there, my back against the door, listening. Silence. The kind that should have been comforting. It was not. I pushed away from the door and moved further inside, dropping my bag onto the small table near the couch. The room looked exactly the same as it had this morning. Nothing out of place. Nothing disturbed. And yet, something felt different. I walked to the kitchen, filling a glass of water just to have something to do with my hands. The sound of it pouring felt too loud in the quiet space. I took a sip, then set it down, my eyes drifting toward the window without thinking. I stepped closer, pulling the curtain aside just enough to look out. The street below was calm. A few cars passing. A couple walking on the sidewalk. And then I saw it. A different car this time. Parked just far enough away to not stand out. But it did. Because now I knew what to look for. My fingers tightened slightly on the edge of the curtain. This was not temporary. This was not something that would fade in a day or two. This was something that had settled into place. I let the curtain fall back into place, turning away from the window, trying to focus on something normal. Anything normal. I moved toward the couch, sitting down slowly, my mind still racing ahead of me, trying to map out a way through something that did not have clear edges. Then my phone buzzed. The sound cut through the silence sharp enough to make me flinch. I stared at it for a second before reaching for it, my pulse picking up without permission. Unknown number. Of course it was. I hesitated, my thumb hovering over the screen, every instinct telling me this was the moment something else would shift again. Then I answered. Hello. Silence. Just for a second. Then a voice I recognized immediately, even though I had only heard it a handful of times. Low. Controlled. Certain. Emily. My name sounded different coming from him through the phone. Closer somehow, even though I was alone in my apartment. You should not be alone tonight, Adrian said. Not a question. Not a suggestion. A statement. I stood up without realizing it, my body reacting before my thoughts could catch up. I am fine, I said automatically, even though the words felt weaker than before. A pause. Not long. Just enough to make me aware that he was still there. Still listening. Look outside, he said quietly. My breath caught. I turned toward the window again, my steps slower this time, more deliberate. I pulled the curtain back, just enough to see. The car was still there. The man across the street shifted slightly, his attention already focused upward. Toward me. I felt it then. Not just awareness. Not just presence. Something deeper. Something that settled under my skin in a way I could not ignore anymore. This is not temporary, is it? I asked, my voice softer now, the resistance fading into something closer to understanding. On the other end of the line, his voice did not change. No, one word. Final. I closed my eyes for a second, exhaling slowly as the reality of it settled into place. When I opened them again, the city looked the same. But I did not. Because now I understood something I had been trying to avoid since that night in the rain. This was not about being protected for a moment. This was about being pulled into something that did not let go. And the most unsettling part was not that he was watching. It was that part of me had already stopped trying to run. The silence after he said no stayed with me long after the call ended. I stood by the window, phone still in my hand, staring down at a street that suddenly felt like it belonged to someone else. Or maybe it always had, and I just never noticed. I let the curtain fall slowly, the fabric brushing against my fingers as I stepped back, my mind trying to catch up with something that had already moved ahead without me. You should not be alone tonight. The words replayed, not urgent, not loud, just certain. Like everything he said, I glanced around my apartment, taking in the small space that had always been enough. The worn couch, the narrow kitchen, the quiet that used to feel like peace. It did not feel like that anymore. It felt temporary, like a place I was passing through instead of living in. I set my phone down on the table, but I did not move far from it, my body already tuned to the idea that it could ring. Again at any moment. Minutes passed, or maybe longer. Time felt strange now, stretching and folding in ways I could not measure. Then there was a knock at the door. Soft, precise, not rushed. My breath caught before I could stop it. I did not ask who it was. I already knew. I walked toward the door slowly, each step deliberate, my hand tightening slightly as I reached for the handle. For a second, I just stood there, staring at the wood in front of me, feeling the weight of the moment settle into place. Then I opened it. Adrian stood on the other side. No suit jacket this time. Just a dark shirt, sleeves rolled slightly, like he had not planned this, even though everything about him still felt planned. Controlled. His gaze met mine instantly, steady and unreadable, like he had been expecting this exact moment down to the second. You came, I said, the words quieter than I intended. He stepped inside without waiting for an invitation, the movement smooth, natural, like the space already belonged to him. I said you should not be alone, he replied, his voice low, carrying the same calm authority as before. I closed the door behind him, the sound softer this time, but no less final. He took a slow look around the apartment, not judging, not dismissing, just observing, like he was placing pieces of me into a picture he was still building. Then his eyes returned to me. This is where you feel safe, he said. It was not a question. I hesitated, then nodded once. It was. The correction slipped out before I could stop it. Something in his expression shifted at that. Not satisfaction. Not exactly. But recognition. Like he understood what that meant without needing me to explain it. Good, he said quietly. I frowned slightly. Good. He stepped closer, not enough to crowd me, but enough to make his presence impossible to ignore. Because now I know what matters. The words settled deeper than I expected, a quiet weight pressing against something I had not realized was exposed. You do not get to decide that, I said, even though my voice lacked the certainty it had before. His gaze did not waver. I already did. There it was again. Not force. Not pressure. Just certainty. The kind that does not ask for permission. I looked away for a second, trying to steady myself, trying to find the version of this conversation where I still had control. This is not normal, I said, more to myself than to him. No, he agreed easily. It is not. I let out a small breath, almost a laugh, but without humor. Then why does it feel like it is already decided? He did not answer right away. Instead, he reached past me, adjusting the curtain slightly, just enough to block the view from outside. The movement was simple, careful, intentional. When he turned back, his eyes held mine again, sharper now, more focused. "Because it is," he said. The room felt quieter after that. Smaller, not because of the walls, but because of the space between us, narrowing in a way I could not ignore anymore. I should have stepped back. I knew that, but I did not, because part of me had already accepted something I was still trying to deny. He was not just protecting me. He was placing himself into my life in a way that could not be undone. "You saved my life," he said, his voice softer now, but no less certain. I swallowed, the memory flashing through my mind before I could stop it. The rain, the silence, the moment everything changed. "And now?" I asked, barely above a whisper. His gaze did not soften. It deepened. "Now I make sure you never regret that choice." The words should have felt like reassurance. Instead, they settled into something more complex. Something that blurred the line between safety and surrender in a way I did not fully understand yet. I looked at him, really looked this time, and realized something that shifted everything again. He was not asking me to step into his world. He was already bringing it into mine. And standing there, in the middle of my small apartment that no longer felt entirely mine, I understood the truth I had been circling since that night in the rain. He did not need to take me anywhere, because wherever I was, he would follow. And somehow, that was even more dangerous.